And we learned that what we got was always more than what we gave. For an artist, working with community is a selfish, rewarding act, and that's as it should be. One final lesson that I want to share from these traveling days of Cornerstone: communities that seem most homogeneous on the surface are often the most divided. Over 20 years ago, I came to Oregon for the first time in my life to produce a Cornerstone play with the town of Long Creek, or Long Crick, as some residents call it, a few hours south of Pendleton. Long Creek has a few hundred residents, mostly ranchers, loggers, and some Forest Service employees. We put on our play in that cattle auction barn that I referenced earlier. We added a wood-burning stove to keep the audience warm. We had to hose down the dirt floor at intermission to keep the dust from rising. We pitched a tent outside as the green room for the actors, and we erected an outhouse for the public to use. The play that we had decided to produce was called The Good Person of Long Creek. It was based on a German play that exposed conflicting views of how to live a good and useful life without taking advantage of your fellow citizens. It turns out that the all-white town of Long Creek was at that time the most divided community that we had worked in. Roughly half the residents went to the bar on Saturday nights, while the other half went to a conservative Christian church on Sunday morning. You simply could not set foot in both buildings. In the naivete of our position as outsiders, we cast the best actors in the town, which of course included members of both factions, including members of families who had a very complex history of very painful conflict. Suddenly, the stakes in telling a little story about morality were much higher. Our discussions were charged, they were difficult, and there were many, many threats to quit from people on all sides. Perhaps the biggest accomplishment of all was that by the time we opened, everyone remained in the cast. To this day, I consider The Good Person of Long Creek one of the most moving and accomplished works of art that I've ever been part of. Driving to Eastern Oregon in that summer of 1988, we stopped in Ashland to see a friend who was performing at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. It was my first time in Ashland, and I was immediately hooked by the energy of the town and the quality of the work. Little did I dream, of course, that my future would lie in this very place. Many years later, when I began thinking about the possibility of landing at the festival as artistic director, I had a moment of panic. Was I giving up my life's work of community-based art? The Shakespeare Festival is a very different company from Cornerstone, with an operating budget of over $29 million, over 410,000 audience members, most of whom come from many miles, sometimes hundreds of miles away, and the largest acting company in the United States, performing this season 835 performances of 12 plays and rotating repertory. It operates on a different scale, to say the least, and with a different focus than I was used to. But the panic passed when I realized, again, what always thrills me: all art is based in community. And the terrific challenge that I faced was to apply the same values to telling stories that I always held in a very different context. So at the festival, we engage our audience in many ways. As one example, we produced the world premiere of a play, Welcome Home, Jenny Sutter. It's a play about a female Marine who's returning home from Iraq. In a first for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, we enlisted a community partner, our local VFW branch. Through the VFW, we met Iraq War vet Melissa Steinman, who played an essential role in advising us, helping us to build a panel of vets who met with the cast, helping us organize an initiative in which all veterans, active duty military personnel, and reservists would receive 2 free tickets throughout the run. We also created a remembrance tree in the lobby for audience members to honor loved ones who have served our country. By the show's closing, the tree had hit the ceiling at 18 feet in height, covered in notes that were overwhelmingly moving. We'd also given away over 1,500 free tickets to vets. After the opening night performance, an audience member grabbed me in the lobby and said, "I'm a wounded Marine vet. You people nailed it, and I thank you." He began to cry, and of course I began to cry. And this was not just an access issue, by the way, right? By inviting vets to come for free, we were sending a very deliberate message to the wider audience that this play was one that needed to be seen by everyone, regardless of one's position on that particular war in Iraq. We've launched American Revolutions, the United States History Cycle, Let me try that again. The United States History Cycle, in which we're commissioning up to 37 new plays. It's the magic number believed to be the total in the Shakespeare canon, to help establish some shared vocabulary about our national identity. William Shakespeare lived in an age of anxiety, especially on the question of who was going to replace the childless monarch, Queen Elizabeth. And in response, he wrote history plays that examined the transfer of power in his country's past. So inspired by the spirit and scale of Shakespeare's work, we want to build a canon of American plays that help us learn from our country's past in order to help illuminate best paths for our future. Under the thematic umbrella of American revolutions, the plays will all look at a moment of change in U.S. history. We're collaborating not only with playwrights, but with historians and other academics, as well as museums, to create the most vibrant possible body of work. To name just a couple of examples, we've got a writer working on a play about LBJ and the passage of the Civil Rights Bill that is slated for production in 2012. We've got a writer working on America's relationship with the Philippines. We've got a writer-director team that happens to include the son of George Moscone, writing a play about an adult son's delayed response to his father's political assassination that is going to run in rep starting this summer with Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. Allison Carey, who co-founded Cornerstone with me and who I invited to Ashland to run the history cycle, likes to say that American Revolutions is a lot like Cornerstone, except the community that we're working with this time is the entire United States. Last July, I took my two sons to see a group of mariachis from a Texas high school performing on the festival's Green Show stage. For almost 50 years, this venue of pre-show entertainment offered free of charge, hosted Renaissance dancers and Elizabethan music. In a move that was most directly inspired by my Cornerstone years, we opened up the Green Show to include an ever-rotating bill of fare that would include artists from our local community and artists from as far away as Mexico City or New York, performers who were community youth and performers who were professionals working at the peak of their craft. Each night, the programming shifts from, say, classical violinists to hip-hop dancers who specialize in a form called crumping. I'm also really interested in the intersection of hip-hop language and classical language, but that is definitely the subject for another talk. I promise. For a theater that relies heavily on tourists as audience, the Green Show has become a gift to our local community. It is wildly popular. Anyway, these kids, these mariachi kids last summer were really good. They were bursting with that kind of naked pride that only amateur artists can have. And they were on fire with enthusiasm for the show that they had seen that afternoon in an OSF theater, the first play of American Revolutions, a brilliantly irreverent satirical look at immigration issues by the Chicano comedy trio Culture Clash. To see that unquenchable spark of enthusiasm in these kids' eyes made me think, yes, this is why we do what we do. In a way, all the stories that I've gathered in my 25-plus years of work are about theater being a safe space for us to embrace the other, a space that allows you to come out the other end of the experience somehow changed, somehow more aware of the way each of our stories cross and weave and wrap to form the fabric of a much bigger story. Obviously, you can tell I love all these stories that I'm sharing and the position that the Oregon Shakespeare Festival is in to tell wonderful stories on our stages each season. But here's where I'm going to stop talking about me and my story and open it up to share the work of all the amazing people I get to collaborate with at OSF and how we have collectively worked to articulate the story that we tell ourselves at the Shakespeare Festival about who we are and why we do what we do. At OSF, I had the privilege and the hard-won honor of being part of a small team that actually sat down and wrote what we modestly entitled, you ready? Our Audience Development Manifesto. And I've got to say, this whole process was inspired by our very tireless audience development manager, Freda Casillas, who some of you have been able to meet over these 2 days. This document was where we hammered out and actually put into words our collective assumptions and aspirations about our audience, who we thought they were, who we wanted them to be. As you can imagine from hearing me speak, I want to include everybody. I want everyone to see work on the Oregon Shakespeare Festival stages because I think our work speaks to anyone on such deep levels. But marketing departments need more than that vague good intention to go on. Education departments need a clear sense of mission to fine-tune their amazing knowledge in ways that serve their direction and the direction that we all want to go in together. So we began this manifesto. We value every single member of our current and future audience. People who have developed a love of the arts have traditionally been and will continue to be OSF's core audience. We need to make an extra effort to invite targeted groups of people who are not coming here already. We are not displacing, but rather adding to our core audience. Those 4 sentences took us about a week of meetings to craft, and they sound so simple. If you take those 4 sentences and you apply them to your marketing and your programming efforts at your organization, how are you doing? Whether you're a small hotel on the coast or a dude ranch in the Strawberry Mountains, or you're even as large as Travel Oregon itself, what kind of story are we telling about ourselves? And how inclusive are we in that story? How are we as a state doing to invite the growing segment of West Coast residents who don't look like me to enjoy everything that Oregon has to offer? Because Oregon, like the rest of the United States, is changing. 1 in 6 public school children in our state already is Latino. Diversity is not a goal, right? It's a simple fact of living in this beautiful experiment that we live in, a nation that is founded on the premise that we are all created equal. Inclusion is what we do with the fact of our diversity, how we leverage our diversity to create an environment where people feel heard and supported to do their very best. Members of my staff and I stand ready to share some tips and tease out problems with any of you, but I also know there are many people in this room who have terrific success stories in these efforts that you can share with all of us. We are going to be much stronger in our efforts if we indeed work together. Folks are sometimes surprised by how much I, as an artistic director, whose primary concern should be the art, talk about audience diversity and inclusion. But audience diversity is not spinach for me. It's not a finger-wagging should, nor is it a feel-good, sentimental, but let's face it, impossible dream. Audience diversity is the heart of the matter. At OSF, we talk about the fact that it has to be the air we all breathe. I know that stories change how we view the world. I've seen it again and again. But then I begin to imagine the power if our theater seats can be routinely filled with people sitting side by side who are as different from one another as possible, in as many ways as possible, watching stories that are as different from one another as possible, performed by people as different as possible from one another. If we can properly channel the energy that comes from all those different perspectives, then people will be able to confront our ever-present differences and at the same time get to the deeper truth of our essential sameness as human beings. The Audience Development Manifesto goes on to describe specific goals to increase the socioeconomic diversity of our audience, increase the age diversity of our audience, increase the ethnic and racial diversity of our audience, increase access opportunities for our audience members who are deaf or blind or mobility impaired. On that last front, by the way, we've got an extraordinary deaf and hard of hearing actor, a brilliant deaf actor, Howie Seago, who you see there in that slide playing the ghost of Hamlet's father. He has joined our acting company, and ever since he's joined, the presence of deaf and hard of hearing audience members has skyrocketed at OSF. I love all these goals and the people in our organization in every department who work really hard to aspire with me to make them a reality. But I want to share 2 last phrases from the manifesto that I believe really make it all possible and which you all might find helpful as you seek to extend your invitation to as many different communities as possible. We recognize that sometimes these new approaches may disrupt the smooth operation of existing systems. We recognize and honor the fact that audience development initiatives will be a part of the fabric of all of our workloads. It's not one, two-person department's problem to solve. It belongs to all of us. We needed to change the story we told ourselves about who we were at OSF and invite everyone in the company to understand that they play an integral role in that story every day, in every job, from custodians to ushers to stagehands to web designers to actors. It took us a full year to articulate a shared narrative around audience development that was positive, affirming, and aspirational at the same time that it honored our truly fabulous current staff and amazing audience. It wasn't easy. And even now, as our marketing and audience development departments create ads and programs that are truly daring, running Spanish headlines and ads for Measure in the local newspaper without translation, for instance. It's our collective belief in our shared story that helps our staff field calls like the one we got just a few weeks ago from an angry Ashland resident. She said how insulted she was that we had created bilingual marketing materials. I moved 1,000 miles to get away from all that, said the indignant voice from somewhere in our tiny community of Ashland on the other end of the phone. As I heard this story, I knew in a deep place in my soul that I don't want to live in the place that that caller believed that she had moved to. I work hard every day to bring the stories to life on our stages and in our organization that tell each of us and our kids that we are not going to live in a place like that. The story that I want us to inhabit is a story big enough for all of us, a story worth devoting a lifetime to telling. Dr. King, April 4th, 1967. We are now faced with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with a lost opportunity. The tide in the affairs of men does not remain at flood, it ebbs. We may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage, but time is adamant to every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residents of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, "Too late." Dr. King was completely right. All moments of opportunity are not equal. More and more lately, I've come to believe that there is a fierce urgency of now when it comes to mapping the future of the story of our nation and the future of the story of our state. We are at a kind of tipping point where if we work hard and with integrity, a more inclusive Oregon is just beyond our horizon line. If we are thoughtful about how we choose to invite in our guests, we can and we will leave our state, and indeed the world, a better place than we found it. My fellow Oregonians, please help me to tell that story. And I thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Thanks.